In the vast, glittering expanse of the Galactic Empire, humanity had always been a footnote in the annals of history. Considered nothing more than a minor species among countless others, humans had been left to their own devices on distant colonies scattered throughout the Outer Rim. The Empire, an ever-expanding titan of power, barely gave them a second glance. But when a sudden and coordinated attack erupted across several human colonies, the calm facade of the Empire began to crack. The attackers were not an army of seasoned veterans or well-equipped warriors from a known species, but a ragtag group of human rebels, factions that had long been simmering beneath the Empire's radar. They struck with a ferocity and precision that no one expected. In an instant, a small Imperial fleet patrolling the outskirts of the human territories was reduced to a smoldering ruin. The rebellion had begun. The Empire's response was swift but dismissive. It was nothing, they said. A minor disturbance from an insignificant species. After all, who could possibly threaten the might of the Galactic Empire? The elite commanders and politicians in the Empire's core worlds continued their daily lives as if the rebellion were a passing storm. But down on the front lines, things were different. Captain Zorath, a seasoned veteran of the Empire's countless wars, was chosen to quell this uprising. He had seen it all, rebellions that were crushed within days, planets pacified without a struggle. With a calm, steady hand, he was sure this would be no different. He took command of a fleet and set out to crush the rebels with overwhelming force. But what awaited him was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The humans, though few in number and with far inferior technology, fought with a brutality and desperation that made Zorath's heart uneasy. They fought not for glory or honor, but for something far deeper: survival. Every skirmish felt like a trap, every victory seemed like a fluke, and every retreat was followed by a more cunning counterattack. One evening, as Zorath's fleet ventured into the outskirts of the human colonies, his ships were ambushed. It was swift, brutal, and disorienting. The humans, who had no reason to be capable of such precision, launched an attack that completely blindsided him. Zorath's fleet, once the pride of the Empire, was severely damaged in a matter of hours. It wasn't just the ferocity of the humans' attacks, it was their sheer unpredictability. Their ships, though small and outdated, seemed to defy the tactics Zorath had relied on for years. They were quick, moving in bursts of speed that the Empire's ships couldn't match. They fought with a savagery Zorath had never seen. The attack left Zorath reeling. The damage was so severe that he was forced to retreat, and it was clear that the rebellion had the capacity to escalate far beyond what the Empire had initially believed. As the remnants of his fleet limped back to Imperial space, the whispers began. These humans are different. Back in the heart of the Empire, no one could ignore the reports anymore. For the first time in centuries, a species that had once been considered insignificant was forcing the Empire to reconsider its strength. The battlefront had shifted, and the humans were no longer just a nuisance. The word was out. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were fighting back, and with every victory, they were learning, adapting, and evolving. It was clear that this was no fleeting rebellion. Something far more dangerous was emerging. Captain Zorath had underestimated the humans, and now he knew that mistake would cost the Empire dearly. The question now was not whether the humans would be defeated, but whether the Empire was truly prepared for what was coming. As the war raged on, the humans' resolve became undeniable. It was no longer about just surviving against the overwhelming power of the Galactic Empire. Humanity was fighting for something far more profound: freedom. As battles unfolded across the galaxy, it became clear that humans weren't just capable of defending their colonies. They were learning, adapting, and evolving at a speed that was nothing short of extraordinary. Their crude starships, once laughed at by the Empire's top commanders, were now being used in ways no one expected. They seemed to slip past the Empire's most advanced warships with ease, taking advantage of terrain, surprise, and resourcefulness in ways that defied logic. Even Imperial officers, trained in the art of war for decades, began to question how such a small, seemingly weak species had turned the tide of battle so many times. As human victories mounted, word began to spread across the galaxy. They had become a symbol of resilience, of defiance. Their tactics, an unpredictable blend of daring raids, guerrilla warfare, and feigned retreats, baffled the Empire's most brilliant minds. And at the heart of this revolution stood a charismatic leader, Captain Amelia Millie Rise, whose speeches about liberty, unity, and the right to fight for one's future stirred the hearts of billions. On the battlefield, her presence was like a flame that ignited the spark of hope in every human soldier. Wherever she went, the rebellion grew stronger, feeding off the momentum of her words and the courage she inspired. The Empire, caught off guard by the relentless wave of human victories, found itself forced to confront the growing resistance with unprecedented measures. General Shana Vorel, a new strategist appointed to counter the human rebellion, was tasked with unraveling the mystery of their success. As a member of the Empire's elite military circle, she was no stranger to crushing uprisings. But these humans were different. She had studied their tactics, and after analyzing the wreckage of countless battles, she came to a chilling conclusion. The humans were not fighting for peace or an end to the war. They were fighting for something far more dangerous. They were fighting for the will to win, and that made them unstoppable. Vorel quickly realized that the more the Empire tried to crush them, the harder the humans pushed back. The human soldiers were relentless, willing to sacrifice everything in the name of their cause. Each time the Empire thought it had dealt a decisive blow, the humans would rally again, their spirit unbroken, their tactics sharpened by their failures. It became a brutal cycle. The Empire would strike, but the humans would learn and adapt, turning their weaknesses into strengths. Their ability to adapt was a key factor that left the Empire struggling to maintain control. As the war intensified, massive battles erupted across multiple sectors, and the fear that had once been contained to the fringes of the galaxy now spread to the very heart of Imperial space. Whole fleets of the Empire were being pushed back by a force that had once been dismissed as insignificant. With each new skirmish, the Empire's pride began to crack. The once invincible fleet, the symbol of imperial might, now found itself questioning its superiority. What was once thought to be an easy war was now a full-scale conflict that stretched imperial resources to the breaking point. In the face of this growing crisis, the Empire was forced to adopt increasingly harsh measures, some of them bordering on desperation. But the humans were always one step ahead, and no amount of imperial force seemed enough to quell their advance. As the human resistance continued to swell, so too did the rebellion's influence. The rallying cry of Captain Millie Rice echoed across the stars, her voice reaching millions of hearts, encouraging them to join the cause. Her message resonated deeply, not just with the humans who had been oppressed for so long, but with other species who had long lived under the Empire's heel. The Empire's once stable rule began to show signs of unraveling, as more and more systems questioned whether they should continue to bow to the Empire's oppressive rule. Riz, ever the beacon of defiance, pushed forward, never pausing in her mission to bring freedom to every corner of the galaxy. Her leadership was the heart of the rebellion, and as long as she stood, the flame of hope burned brighter than ever. The human resistance was no longer just a nuisance. It was a storm gathering strength, and the Empire had only begun to realize how powerful this storm had become. The deeper they dug in to destroy the humans, the more they realized that they were up against something far more formidable than they had ever anticipated. The human spirit, fueled by the hunger for freedom and justice, had become a force that could not be easily crushed. And with Millie Rise at the helm, the humans were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting to reshape the galaxy itself. The Empire's first major response to the growing human rebellion was swift, overwhelming, and brutal. A massive fleet of Imperial destroyers, the pride of their military, was unleashed to crush the resistance once and for all. Captain Zoreth, who had already faced the rebellion in earlier skirmishes, believed this would be the final blow to their defiance. The human colonies were nothing compared to the might of the Empire, and he felt certain that with such firepower, they could wipe the human threat from the galaxy in one decisive strike. However, what followed was nothing like what Zorath had expected. In a stunning series of battles, the human fleet, vastly outnumbered, used tactics that baffled the Empire at every turn. They were like shadows in the night, appearing out of nowhere and disappearing just as quickly. The humans, with their makeshift ships and limited resources, turned the tides with surprising effectiveness. They used decoys to lure the Imperial destroyers into traps, engaging in hit-and-run attacks that left the Empire's forces spinning in confusion. Ambushes were set up in deep space, where the humans attacked with pinpoint precision before vanishing into the vast emptiness of the galaxy. Each battle left the Empire bewildered and increasingly frustrated. No matter how much force they brought to bear, the humans adapted, countering their moves in ways that defied all Imperial expectations. Amidst this chaos, Captain Millie Rice and her crew discovered something that would change the course of the war: a long-lost human artifact hidden on one of the colonies they had liberated. This artifact, ancient and powerful, was unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. At first, the humans weren't sure of its full capabilities, but as they studied it, they realized it held the potential to shift the balance of power. It was a piece of technology that could enhance their starship's capabilities far beyond anything the Empire could have imagined. With this newfound advantage, the humans began not only to reclaim the territories they had lost in the early stages of the war, but also to launch deep strikes into the very heart of the Empire's territory. The tide was turning, and with each victory, the humans grew bolder. They struck directly at the Imperial strongholds, sowing confusion and fear throughout the Empire. The Empire's citizens, long shielded from the realities of war, began to feel the impact of the rebellion in ways they never had before. Imperial propaganda could no longer mask the truth. Humanity was rising, and its power was undeniable. On Imperial worlds, the populace began to question their leadership as they saw their once unbeatable fleet falter and their precious star systems fall one by one. The humans weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were actively dismantling the Empire's authority and proving that no regime, no matter how powerful, could hold them back. Captain Zorath, who had once believed the war would be a quick and easy victory, found himself in a position he had never imagined. The Imperial fleet was no longer the fearsome force it once was. Every battle seemed to end with more losses than victories. Zorath, once filled with confidence, now found himself questioning the strategies that had brought the Empire so much success in the past. In a rare moment of clarity, he requested a personal meeting with Millie Rice, hoping to understand what made her and her people so different. Standing face to face with the leader of the human rebellion, Zorath was struck by the fierce determination in her eyes. "You think you've defeated us?" Millie asked, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "This is only the beginning." Zorath, once certain that the humans were no match for the Empire, now realized that he had underestimated them in ways he couldn't comprehend. These weren't just soldiers, they were warriors driven by a passion that the Empire, for all its power, couldn't break. Millie's words lingered in his mind long after the meeting had ended, as a sense of dread began to creep into his heart. The Empire was no longer in control, and the war, it seemed, was far from over. In the heart of the Galactic Empire, the leadership was in chaos. What had once seemed like a minor rebellion, an inconvenience that could be swiftly crushed, was now shaking the very foundations of their control over the galaxy. Humans, once dismissed as an insignificant species, had become a symbol of defiance, an unstoppable force that had rallied not only other human colonies, but also oppressed species within the Empire's vast reach. The rebellion had sparked something far greater than the Empire had anticipated. Across the galaxy, whispers of the human uprising began to spread, fueling resistance movements in the most unlikely places. The humans had ignited a fire, and now the Empire's grip was slipping. In an emergency summit held on the Empire's capital world, the ruling council gathered to discuss the rapidly deteriorating situation. Panic was starting to seep into the highest echelons of imperial power. The question was no longer whether they could defeat the humans. It was how much more damage they were willing to tolerate before the rebellion spread beyond control. It was in this tense meeting that a terrifying proposal surfaced, one that would change the future of the galaxy. A faction of imperial officials, led by the cold and ruthless Grand Admiral Hana, suggested the unthinkable: abandon all outposts in the Outer Rim, retreat to the furthest reaches of the galaxy, and allow the human insurrection to burn itself out. It was a surrender, but one that would save the Empire from further humiliation. Hana's plan was radical, but he believed it was the only way to preserve the Empire's core. However, not everyone agreed. General Shana Vorel, who had been closely studying the human tactics and resolve, warned against this course of action. If we retreat, if we allow them to claim any victory, she argued, we may set off a chain reaction. The oppressed species under our rule will see it as a sign of weakness, and the rebellion will spread like wildfire. Vorel's voice carried the weight of experience, but her warnings were met with resistance. To many, Hana's plan seemed like the only viable option to prevent the Empire from being completely torn apart. The debate raged on, with both sides refusing to back down, but in the midst of this turmoil, another surprising development unfolded on the fringes of the Empire. Millie Rice and her crew, always on the move and staying one step ahead of Imperial forces, had uncovered something that would tip the scales even further. They discovered a hidden faction of humans, exiles, renegades, and outcasts who had been living on the very edges of Imperial space, far from the reach of the Empire's might. These were the forgotten humans, those who had been pushed aside, abandoned and ignored by both the Empire and the rebellious colonies. They had no stake in the earlier war, but they were ready to fight. These exiles had developed their own network of ships, resources, and knowledge that could help the rebellion in ways no one had imagined. Millie, ever the leader, saw the opportunity this presented. The uneasy alliance formed between her fleet and the renegades wasn't just a matter of numbers, it was a matter of unity. With their help, the human resistance grew exponentially. These renegades had lived on the edge of survival for years, and now they were prepared to fight for something far greater than just their own survival. They brought with them new tactics, new technologies, and the kind of cunning that came from living on the margins of the Empire. The human forces had already become a threat to the Empire's might, but with this new alliance, they were now a force to be reckoned with. As the Empire's leaders continued to argue over their next move, Millie's influence and the growing strength of the human resistance began to shift the balance. Back in the heart of the Empire, the once proud Imperial fleet found itself facing a growing tide of defiance that it could no longer ignore. The humans were no longer just a nuisance, they were a revolution in the making. The summit's debate was a reflection of the Empire's fear. If the humans could unite with their newfound allies, it wouldn't be long before they had the strength to challenge the Empire on its own terms. The Empire's grip on the galaxy, which had seemed so secure for so long, was starting to crack, and with every passing day, the shockwaves of this rebellion were felt further and further across the galaxy. The stage was set for something far more dangerous than anyone had predicted, something that could bring the Empire to its knees. As the human resistance grew in strength, the atmosphere within the Galactic Empire grew increasingly tense. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the once proud Imperial leadership now found itself backed into a corner. The rebellions, once seen as small and insignificant, had now ignited a full-scale war, and the realization that humanity's resolve was unlike anything they had faced before was sinking in. The rebellion was no longer confined to the fringes of the galaxy, it was spreading. It was a wildfire, one that burned brighter with each passing day, fueled by the strength of unity, freedom, and the unrelenting will of the human spirit. The Empire's response: desperation. At the highest levels of command, the advice was clear: run. The once mighty Empire, confident in its dominance, was now considering the unthinkable, abandoning entire sectors, evacuating key systems, and surrendering once prized planets to the advancing human forces. These were worlds that the Empire had built its foundation upon, and yet now they were seen as expendable in a last-ditch effort to protect the core worlds from the growing storm of rebellion. General Shan of Orel, who had long served the Empire with unwavering loyalty, found herself in an increasingly difficult position. She had studied the humans, watched them fight, adapt, and evolve, and she couldn't ignore the undeniable truth. Humanity was not simply surviving, they were thriving. Their methods, their strategies, their sheer will to win, it was something the Empire had underestimated from the very start. Torn between her duty to the Empire and the undeniable reality of humanity's power, Vorel's doubts grew stronger. One night, as the Empire's leadership continued to argue over their next move, she secretly contacted Captain Millie Reyes. In an encrypted message, she proposed a negotiation, a chance to end the war with minimal bloodshed. She believed that if they could come to terms, perhaps the Empire could salvage something from this disaster. Millie, who had become a symbol of defiance and resilience for all humanity, was not interested in peace talks. She'd had fought too long, lost too much, and seen too many fall to entertain the idea of bargaining with an empire that had sought to crush her people for so long. She responded coldly, making her stance clear. "We're not running," Millie's message read, her words sharp and unwavering. "The Empire must understand this. Humanity stands its ground." The fire in her voice echoed across the stars, a declaration that would resonate far beyond the walls of the Empire. Millie had no interest in compromising with an enemy that had no interest in peace. Her message was one of unyielding resistance. The humans were no longer asking for survival, they were demanding a future they would fight for at any cost. While Vorel wrestled with her conscience, another figure in the Empire, Grand Admiral Hana, continued to push for more drastic measures. He had never been one for subtlety or negotiation. His plan was simple, an all-out offensive to wipe out the human forces once and for all. He believed that the key to victory lay in overwhelming force, a strategy that would annihilate entire fleets of human ships in one decisive strike. It was a plan that could either crush the rebellion or set the galaxy ablaze in a conflict that might last for decades. Hana's forces gathered, preparing for a strike that would likely shift the war in the Empire's favor. However, Millie's forces, always one step ahead, had their own plan in motion. They had anticipated Hana's moves, and they were ready. Millie, along with her crew, had prepared a devastating trap, one that would lure the Imperial fleet into a calculated ambush, a trap so cunning and so perfectly timed that it could change the course of the war forever. With the help of their newly allied renegades, the humans had developed a strategy that would strike at the heart of the Empire's military power. It was risky, dangerous, and bold, but it was a chance they had to take. The pieces were in place, and the humans, now armed with new technology and an unbreakable resolve, were ready to show the Empire that no amount of force could stamp out their spirit. The tension in the galaxy reached a boiling point as the Empire's leaders struggled to maintain control, while the humans, united under Millie's leadership, prepared for their most daring strike yet. The fate of the galaxy seemed to hang in the balance, and every decision made could tip the scales one way or the other. With each passing moment, the storm of war raged closer to the Empire's heart. The time for talk was over. The time for action had arrived. The galaxy held its breath as the final confrontation between the Galactic Empire and the human resistance loomed large. The Empire, stretched thin after years of war and rebellion, gathered its remaining forces for a last-ditch effort to crush the human uprising once and for all. At the heart of their strategy was the mighty dreadnought Obsidian Wraith, a behemoth of destruction, bristling with weapons capable of obliterating entire fleets. This was to be their final weapon, the Empire's ultimate hope. It was a symbol of their power, a ship so advanced and powerful that no enemy could possibly withstand it. Under the command of Grand Admiral Hana, the Obsidian Wraith was sent to the heart of the human fleet, prepared to end the war in one swift, devastating blow. The Empire believed that with this ship, victory was inevitable, but Millie Riss, ever the tactician, had anticipated this move. She knew the Empire would pull out all the stops, and she had planned accordingly. The humans had learned from their many battles, and now they were more than just a thorn in the Empire's side. They were a force to be reckoned with. Millie and her crew had spent months preparing for this moment, and they were ready. They had developed new technologies, weapons, and strategies that would change the course of the war forever. The obsidian wraith may have been an imposing symbol of imperial might, but it was no match for the cunning and ingenuity of the human resistance. When the two fleets finally clashed, the Empire was caught completely off guard. Millie's forces, with their unparalleled ability to adapt, launched an unprecedented surprise attack that left the Imperial fleet scrambling. The humans had deployed new technologies, stealth systems, decoys, and weaponry that the Empire had never seen before. It was a well-coordinated strike, so precise that it shattered the obsidian wraith in a single blow. The dreadnought, once thought to be invincible, was reduced to a burning wreck in the void of space. The destruction of the obsidian wraith was a blow to the Empire that they could not recover from. The once mighty flagship was gone, and with it, the Empire's final hope of turning the tide of war. The battlefields were suddenly filled with chaos as the Imperial forces struggled to regroup. For the first time in years, the human resistance had proven that they could defeat the Empire on its own terms, using the Empire's own arrogance against it. The obsidian wraith was not just a ship. It was a symbol of everything the Empire had come to rely on: power, control, and predictability. And now it was destroyed. With their flagship gone, the Empire's forces were thrown into disarray. Commanders and military leaders, who had long been loyal to the Empire, found themselves questioning the legitimacy of their cause. The Empire's once feared military had been shattered, and the growing realization began to settle in among the ranks. The humans were not to be underestimated. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting to reshape the galaxy. The more the humans resisted, the clearer it became that they would not yield, no matter the cost. This was no longer a rebellion to crush. It was a revolution, and it was winning. As the human fleet continued its relentless assault, planetary governors and military officials who had once sworn loyalty to the Empire began to waver. The thought of continuing the war, of fighting for an empire that was clearly crumbling, was no longer appealing. Those who had once stood at the Empire's side now found themselves questioning whether they should continue to follow orders, knowing full well that the human forces were unstoppable. It was a turning point. The Empire's once ironclad grip on the galaxy was slipping, and the humans, led by Millie, were poised to strike the final blow. The realization that the Empire's dominance was coming to an end spread across the galaxy like wildfire. It was no longer a matter of if the Empire would fall, it was a matter of when. And as the stars burned in the darkness of space, the humans stood united, unwavering in their resolve, ready to finish what they had started. The Empire had underestimated them, and now the galaxy would bear witness to the true power of humanity's spirit. With the catastrophic fall of the obsidian wraith and the devastating defeat of the Imperial fleet, the once immense power of the Galactic Empire was now in ruins. The enormous war machine that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was left scattered, broken, and leaderless as its most formidable vessel lay destroyed in the cold void of space. The Empire, once untouchable, now found itself reeling before a force it had dismissed as inconsequential. Humanity, the very species it had sought to subjugate and crush, had proven that they were not only capable of survival, but were an undeniable power in their own right. The advice within the Empire's highest councils was unanimous, a desperate plea whispered behind closed doors. Run. Run as far as you can. Captain Millie Ray stood at the helm of her flagship, watching the stars stretch before her, the vastness of the galaxy suddenly feeling like an open road. In front of her, the remnants of the once proud Empire, now a broken shadow of itself, were fleeing in every direction. The leaders who had once commanded fleets and dominated entire star systems were now little more than refugees, abandoning their crumbling empire to escape the wrath of the human resistance. Yet, for Millie, the victory felt bittersweet. The battle was won, but the war, the struggle to redefine the galaxy, was far from over. She stared out into the distance, contemplating the future. The humans had proven their might, not with brute force alone, but with something far more powerful, an unyielding will to survive, a capacity to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds, and a refusal to accept defeat, no matter the cost. They had stood their ground against a galaxy that had underestimated them, and now they stood victorious. As the last of the Empire's leaders fled into the unknown reaches of the galaxy, abandoning worlds and systems that had once been the heart of their dominance, the humans were left with the bittersweet task of rebuilding. The galaxy was forever changed. There would be no returning to the old ways. No longer would the Empire dictate the fate of the stars. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Humanity had earned its place not as a minor species in the Empire's sprawling dominion, but as an equal, perhaps even a dominant force in its own right. The galaxy's future was theirs to shape, and they would no longer be passive observers. Millie knew that this was only the beginning. Her message to the Empire was simple, but it resonated with every word. Run, but know this, the humans will follow. There was no escaping the reality they had forged. The Empire had tried to run from their defiance, but humanity's reach was vast, and they would pursue, they would rebuild, and they would continue to fight for their place in the galaxy. The rebels who had once fought for their freedom now stood as the galaxy's new rulers, with the power to shape its future. The human resistance had succeeded where no one thought they could, and now, with the last remnants of the Empire scattered to the far corners of the stars, the humans could finally begin to rise, their power and influence growing stronger with each passing day. The story of the Galactic Empire, once a tale of invincibility and conquest, was now a legend of downfall. The humans had done the impossible. They had taken on the galaxy's mightiest empire and torn it down. The stars, once held by the Empire's unyielding grip, were now open to those who dared to dream of something more, of freedom, of unity, of a galaxy where all species could stand side by side. And as Captain Millie Reyes looked out at the horizon of this new, uncertain future, she knew one thing above all: humanity had finally found its place among the stars. The battle had been hard fought, but the war was theirs to win. The Empire may have run, but humanity would follow, and they would never stop until the galaxy was truly free.